All right, so it says recording in progress. Welcome, everybody. Welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining on a Friday evening. Um, Today's topic of the day is very interesting. It's about going beyond your basic starting up and thinking about scaling up, the risks associated with the same, and what to expect, what not to expect, and who all can help you on your journey to scale up. Couple of things which are there on our list today, which we are lucky to have Kunal to answer all of it. Guys, my request to you that throughout the session, please keep yourselves on mute and keep your cameras turned off. Whatever questions you might have, just post in the comment box. We'll be happy to pick a few which are most relevant for today's topic. All right, just a formal introduction. This is Vineet Khurana from Chandigarh Angels Network, and we have with us Kunal Andwani, who is the founder and CEO of UTrade Solutions. He's also one of the founding members at CAN. Um, and and yeah, Kunal is a serial entrepreneur, have been working in the blockchain domain as well. For those of you who know him already, he's into financial services primarily. And what else? Golfing, stand-up comedy. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. But yeah, just for fun.
Yeah, when you said serial entrepreneur, I was watching too much Netflix. So when you said the word serial, I was just thinking killer. But anyways, please start. Please start.
Yeah,
No more jokes. Please start.
right, Kunal. So, Kunal, as we are here to discuss about the scalability of a startup, which is one topic of a lot of interest when it comes to investors, and I think is of utmost importance when it comes to investing in startups. And we also at Chandigarh Angels Network somehow, want to look at the scalability of a startup, in the primary look as we have while scouting a startup and going to the next stages. I think today's session is going to enlighten a lot of people. So my first one for the day, Kunal, is what exactly is this scalability of a startup, and why is it so important for founders as well as investors?
So, if you think about any new business, what is the way we define a startup, or the way at least unknowingly and unintentionally we try to look at a startup is that a company that can scale. Otherwise, any small new kirana store is also a startup. There are many businesses which start as startups, but they're not really scalable and hence not investable, and hence they are not considered the startup as per the startup ecosystem. So the startup definition of startup ecosystem is a startup is a company that can scale a lot. Meaning, if you are opening one bookstore only, or you're opening one kirana store, you may do very well for yourself. It may be a profitable business, but it's not really a startup in which investors can come in, pump in a lot of money, and it can grow 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. But instead of the bookstore, if you're doing change of bookstores, then it may be a startup idea. It may be an investable business, because the chain of bookstores can have hundreds, thousands of bookshops, as long as, of course, there is profitability at scale. The cost goes down, profits go up, etc. Or if you're doing an online bookstore like Flipkart or Amazon or something else, that is a scalable startup, because they can, from one website, they can reach so many people, and from their logistics backend, the warehouses and the merchant networks, they can supply you tons of products, tons of books at your place at a convenience. So that is a scalable startup, which we actually, and every startup that you hear about in Economic Times and Your Story, or things we talk about, and in angel networks or venture capital ecosystem, all these startups are meant to be scalable. Scalable as in they can grow from 100 on day one or year one to 1,000 or 10,000 worth of units, revenues, profits in the next 3, 5, 8, 10 years. So if you can grow more than 10 to 100 times in the next 10 years, at least you have a potential. Even if you don't grow, that's okay. Then you are really a scalable startup, and that's a startup which everyone talks about. Why is it important to scale? is the following, that if you are not scaling, means you are a normal family business or you are a small business which does pretty well for itself, for its family, but not for the other stakeholders, including investors or their client base or everything else. So they are sort of limited in their impact. So I'm not saying that Kirana store or a bookstore is not a good business. It's a good business. It works for a few people, but they are not really scalable. They will not come get venture funding or angel funding easily if they don't have a potential to scale. So it's important. Also, many co-founders put in their days and nights, their energy, their blood and sweat, because they want to see their business grow very big. They don't want it to just be another small business, family run, which runs forever at only 20% profit margins, and with serving only a handful of dozens to hundreds to thousands of clients locally. Everyone wants their businesses to grow. So that's why scalability matters. The ambitions of co-founders, the ambitions of investors, the ambitions of the ecosystem, the expectations from it, and the potential impact people want to have come from startups is why the scalability of a startup matters. And that's what all investors look at early on before investing in startups. And co-founders also look at scalability of ideas and businesses before starting a startup.
Excellent. Just to extend my question a bit, is it fair for an early stage investor to look at the scalability of an early stage startup? Because you don't know much yet. You don't know where exactly is a startup headed, right? So at the initial
Agree.
stage, do you think it's fair?
So fair to look at it, evaluate it, consider it, yes. But of course, so nobody knew the Snapdeal would grow from selling small things, selling coupons somewhere, copying Groupon, to becoming a $6-7 billion company in India in 2016, going back to wherever they are right now. You don't know at early stages how much scale can you achieve. Could you have thought that Apple, which was always a computer company, would be scaling up to build iTunes, to build um, phones, which they were never used to doing? Could you have thought that Amazon, the bookstore online e-commerce company, would be running AWS, right? Could you have thought that Google would be telling you how to get from point A to point B by Google Maps? They were not meant to do these things, okay? So these are the scalabilities which come later. I mean, Reliance used to be the oil company of India. Data became the new oil, so this launched Geo, right? That's a joke, okay? I think scalability, you should consider how big can you get? How big can Flipkart get? How big can a small company get? But it may not be completely trackable. It may not be complete. You can't hold entrepreneurs accountable day one that you said this, now it's not happening, or now it's not happening this way, but it's happening that way. You can't hold them accountable to the details of the scalability plans, but at least do they have a potential? That's something one could, should, and must look at. Not just investors, but entrepreneurs themselves. They must know how big can they become, how big their market could be, how much scale can they achieve. They must have some thoughts. They must have some ambitions. They must have some plans to get there, possibly. Of course, everything else being equal and all the stars being aligned and everything falling in place, or some adaptations of it during the process. So, scalability as a thought has to be there. But, sometimes, why is it important for an investor? Let's say there's a person who comes in and says, I'm going to launch a Kirana store, only one store, local, near to my house, go in there, sell day-to-day stuff, do very well for myself. Now, if that's the ambition, that's a starting point of the co-founder or the entrepreneur. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not an investable business. It will not attract any investment. Those kind of businesses typically get family investments or debt investment. They take loans from banks, etc. So when we talk about investable, we talk about not the bank investments, but more like equity investments where the investors take equity risk on the business. So the ambition has to be there. Okay. Whether the plan is clear or not, or how much it scales, where it scales in direction one or two or three, who knows? That's okay. That's okay.
Got it. Thank you so much. Now, scaling up too early or too late may pose some sort of potential risks. It may not deliver the desirable results. How does a startup figure out when is it the time for them to start scaling?
So, very good question. This is very hard to give a generic answer, but I'll try to give it some examples or whatever thoughts come to my mind. So, number one, at point in time, you just don't know how fast are you going, how are you going. You need to somewhere manage your ambitions, your investors' expectations, and realistic ability of your team to deliver or your team to grow and deliver whatever is needed by the market or by the clients or by whatever whoever you're trying to serve. So point in time. So take an example. A tree. A tree grows initially from bottom to top, and then it starts branching out. Okay, it doesn't start branching out day one. If it does, then it will not have a strong foundation. So being able to, I think the way to look at this is if you're number one, you should find the right speed. A bit slower is better than a bit faster. Bit slower, as in, doing it scaling a little later is better than scaling a little too sooner. Because if you scale too soon, you will break things. You will break your clients' expectations. Sometimes these reputations lost are unable to, you would not be able to recover from them, and it's harder to maintain trust with your ecosystem. So um, it's better to actually go a little slower than what most people say. And what I'm saying is contrary to the typical Silicon Valley statements, which I'm hopeful that people are learning by all the mistakes happened in the last few years by SoftBanks and many others, where they say that fail but fail fast, or go fast and fail, try to break things. It's not the right approach. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's the right way to try to grow too fast and then struggle if you don't deliver. In my view, the way to think about this is the following. You need to constantly look at your team's delivery capability. Your team, you have X amount of people in your team. You have they can deliver Y amounts of products or services, right? Whatever that X or Y may look like. Now, don't try to make Y 2Y next year if your team X is not going to X. Okay. And realistically, hiring takes time. Retaining good people, maintaining a culture, or evolving the culture of the company takes time. And with that, changes the expectations of your internal teams as well as external market participants. Just because you raised a lot of money doesn't mean you can do everything. So I think it's important to actually go a little slower. It at the end comes down to just keeping in mind that you can't put nine mothers together and say, "Give me a baby in a month." That can't happen, and you can't even say that give nine mothers. You put nine mothers together, and in 9 months have nine babies. That will also you'll struggle because all the mothers will fight along those times, right? So just understand the company culture matters. How people, your senior people you are hiring, how you're retaining them, how you're tracking them, how they are kept accountable and responsible for things they are doing, how much money you are putting in, etc. All these things matter. You can go at an acceptable pace, and that is what you have to determine within your business, within your ecosystem, with your team. Unfortunately, in the last few years, it happened that many entrepreneurs were doing pretty well, but then they started listening to their VC investors who said, go fast, break things, move double fast. So valuations go up. But then the models are not sustainable. And eventually, many of such companies, including WeWork, they forgot to have a right business model, including Snapdeal. They struggled because they realized their business was just about fundraising, nothing else. There is no loyalty with the customer, unfortunately. Many big businesses have slowed down dramatically, and many may shut down in the next few months, quarters, and years because they did not follow the right pace. They've moved too fast or too slow. Too slow is still acceptable in my view. Too slow is okay. You can deal with it. It just means that your return on your growth will be a little slower. That's okay. But too fast is where I think most people have struggled, and that's where the competition has played a role. If you're Zomato versus Swiggy, the faster one survives. It's a race to survival. Faster one raises more money and survives. If you are Flipkart versus Snapdeal, the one who can move fast, scale fast, raise more money is able to survive. Unfortunately, that's how the games had become. So that's a sad part, I guess. But to an extent, I think finding the right scalability plan, right pace to scale at point in time when you're running your business is very hard. So it's very important to constantly take a step back, have some mentors, board of advisors who can let you know where you're going and help you take the step back, because day to day you're on the pedal, you're driving in the driving seat, you are just moving fast because your car can go fast, but You need to be wary of the traffic conditions, the turns around the corners, the traffic speed limits at areas. So you need to be really careful of some market environments around and be careful in moving too fast. So it's very hard to know at point in time, but the only way to do is just take step backs, look at your team's delivery capability, constantly keep checking if your customers are being satisfied as you're scaling or not. If not, then look back and make sure your quality is there. Otherwise, once you lose the trust of clients, it's very hard to regain in spite of whatever money you may be willing to put back.
Very well said, Kunal. In fact, picking up on what you just said about the team and the culture, can I ask you a little further to what sort of challenges could exist while you're scaling out for the culture of your company and the team that you employ to deliver what you expect to get from them?
So, when you start a company, I'm not sure if you know this, that early on, even Flipkart co-founders for the year one were delivering the pages themselves. There were only 5 to 7 people, handful of IIT graduates, founders, pass outs, handful of people. Some were building a website, some were picking up books from somewhere and delivering somewhere else, right? This is a culture in early on. Everyone does everything. So early part of your startup, you hire or you should hire generalists, people who are willing to do multiple roles, move around a little from one role to another, and willing to be open to learn and get involved in many things. So the generalist is how the culture starts. A real startup is within first year or second year or so, 8 to 10 people. Like that's what many people say, that you should be able to feed your team with 2 large pizzas. So make sure you don't have 2 fat people who can eat the pizza alone. But so essentially, a small team is 8 to 10 people. Culture is different. You know each other, you care for each other, you're all together. That's a honeymoon period of a startup as well, because you have lesser pressure for delivering too much revenue or growth or competing, etc. You're just trying to build a product or a platform or something in the early days. But as you evolve from 10 people to 20 or 10 to 30 or 10 to 50 in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what funding you raise, what business plan you are trying to execute, etc., culture changes. Now, people who used to sit next to you, if you are the co-founder, now they may not be getting access to you because you've hired other people, and they will feel bad. The culture evolves. So few things to note. Number one, make sure you find time for your core team members who were there from the beginning. Look after them. Their emotional bonding is very important and crucial for success of your startup. Secondly, afterwards, when you're expanding from 10 to 50, now you do not hire generalists. You know what you're doing to an extent. 1 to 3 years, you've been trying to build your startup and scale it. Now you should be hiring specialists. Now you know you need specific people to do X, Y, whatever those functions are. Okay, so look for more specialists than generalists. Okay. Number three, some people who did very well early on because they were generalists and they were just helping you and they had your trust and they were doing pretty well, whatever was needed. Maybe for some people, there is no more role in the company. It happens all the time. Co-founders who started did okay 1, 2 years. Third year, they've hired the specialists who are doing the jobs much better. Your co-founder either has to grow out of their existing role or previous role into something else, or if they don't grow, there is no role for them in the company. And you can't keep carrying, unfortunate word and I use, you can't carry dead weight with you. You can't carry baggage. You can't carry people who are not delivering and owning and driving things, because your resources are still limited. You can't keep paying everyone high salaries or high resources if not delivering as much to you. So you are not just fire everyone either. Try to make sure that they can grow into the roles where you need them. Try to fit them wherever it's possible with the growth of the company. But beyond a point, sometimes it's just not possible. They are not willing to do it. They're not able to do it. In that case, sometimes co-founders have to move out. Happens typically in the 5 years of the company. If 2, 3, 4, 5 co-founders had started, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 have left, not because they don't like them or they don't like you, but because that's how the world is. When you If you're not growing into some other roles as a company grows, you need to nurture yourself into some company's growth aspect. If you're unable to justify a role, you should not be. So these are two things I think culturally you should keep in mind, change, and try to understand and maintain the culture as far as possible, or evolve the culture what you expect, because what you were getting from 10 people is not what you're going to get from 50. It's going to look very different. So look for specialists, make sure current existing previous teams can grow into new roles. Otherwise, there is no role for them. They may have to out. They may keep their sweat equity from previous years, and obviously give them enough time to find an alternate, help them out, uh, and make sure the culture evolves in the right way. And the specialist you bring in, you need to now work more with the process than with people. I.e., you should not be dependent on one person making all the decisions. You should be implementing processes which could be people independent. People may come and go eventually, but processes should drive the firm forward. So this is what you will move from 10 people to 50 people to 500 people. And many companies get lucky and do this in 1 to 3 years, and that may be fast for them. Some of them break a lot of stuff along the way, but that's how scaling is if you get overfunded.
Yep. Thank you so much. Um, so you tend to break things. I just said, you tend to break things when you move fast. Now, how does a startup ensure that after scaling up the business, it remains sustainable and the momentum does not drop?
So, um, so say you've scaled from 10 people to 500 people. You've scaled from serving one city. You were selling, let's say, coupons in one state or city. Now you are selling in the metro cities, or you're selling in 10 states, 20 states. Um, and you've not broken much. You're doing okay. Now, in order to stay sustainable, you need to align your business plan, constantly look at your business plan, look at your unit economics, how at scale your cost is going down, but your cost of running your business, cost of customer acquisition, cost of any other expenses you have at scale should go down per unit of service or product that you're producing. And at the same time, your revenue, your profitability, your business growth is still coming in. So that, focus on those things in order to make sure that now you are not a startup, now you are a small medium enterprise. You are an MSME, or you are a, depending on your scale, you are a real business now. Now you need to get real. Any projections you had put 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago at your startup stage will out of the window. Now the reality will begin. Most likely you'll be doing lesser business than what you had projected, because initially the projections are always more optimistic and rosy the really led to be. But now you're back to the numbers of growing at XYZ pace, which is probably more realistic. Now you can't just say that I will grow 10 times every year. Most likely you can't. You'll probably be happy and comfortable growing at 20, 30% year on year. If you are in a business like that, that's acceptable from a decent sized business. So sustainability comes down to your ambitions, your plans. So just focus on your business plan, your unit economics very carefully. That's one. And the growth doesn't drop. Growth will at some point. All businesses growth drop at some point. Now, for some it may come in 5 years, for some it comes in 10 years, for some it comes in 20 years. As you diversify out and do other things, branch out. Um, so the growth dropping is okay as long as you are able to deliver returns to your key shareholders, your stakeholders, your clients, and you're putting more and more value. If it meets your ambition, you're making enough, you should be happy. You should not chase endless growth from a business. But maybe there are opportunities for diversification in due course. Maybe there are upsell opportunities to your existing clients that you can do. But growth will drop a little at some point. But that's okay. You may grow internationally, and beyond a point, you may grow into some alternate products, or you may grow horizontally or vertically within your supply chain as well. So there are opportunities where you can continue growing. But your business, every market saturates at some point. Okay, every market grow forever. So growth drop is okay as long as it's sustainable, and if it's meeting your ambitions, you are sort that's fine. If it's not, then you need to do something more or move out and start something new.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, when it comes to bootstrapping, startups are usually tight on resources and money. Money is not unlimited. Now, what's your advice on managing both the things effectively, resources and money, when it comes to scaling up your venture?
So there are, compared to the previous 15 years when VCs have become very active in India, uh, relatively speaking, the world was working on bootstrapping only. Bootstrapping was the only thing most people knew. Most existing family traditional businesses are bootstrapped. They just take longer. They may take 10 years to reach from 1 crore to 100 crore revenue compared to a VC fund 50 crore where you take 50 crore investment and you move from 1 crore to 100 crore revenue in 3 to 5 years in a sustainable or unsustainable format. Um, so traditionally, businesses were always bootstrapped, and the way they were managing resources was they were reinvesting the proceeds or profits from every year in the business back into the business. So they were, let's say, in a year they were making 10 crores of revenue. Their cost were 5 crore. 5 crore was profit. Then they were reinvesting that 5 crore to buy new machinery, to build new products, to expand their sales and marketing, to service different clients in different countries or different industries, etc. They were growing that way, and they were growing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% year on year. Bootstrap businesses work like that. Most of them do. Handful these days of the digital businesses grow much faster, even in spite of bootstrapping. Good for them. But very few businesses traditionally had been able to do that. So I think your resources are always limited. Don't be over ambitious. Don't try to do too many things. You can't do beyond a point. In any case, that's one of the, by the way, traps of entrepreneurship. You get so many distractions, so many things where you can spend your time and look at opportunities. But reality is you can execute only one or two or three of them very well. So focusing on your core and not getting distracted into new areas where you put in your time, your money, your resources, and then you get nothing back or not enough back, or you drop the ball on the existing business. That's a classic trap of entrepreneurship, in my view. Very hard to know at point in time for entrepreneurs. They do want to do many things. They are ambitious. They're full of energy to realize that they need to drag the whole company along with them to make sure they can deliver into every new thing that they do. So, frankly, going a little slower, reinvesting your profits, managing resources optimally and diligently into the things you want to do, you really which your business in a sustainable fashion. That's a great model. I think if you can avoid raising money, don't raise money. If you can avoid raising money, just avoid it. Do not bring in investors. Be your own boss. Scale yourself and scale in a more sustainable way and be bootstrapped. And many bootstrap businesses have done very well. I think Vinith and I were talking Zoho, Zerodha, handful of them have done fantastically well, and they are all multi-hundred crore businesses, if not multi-thousand. And they didn't take a single penny of capital. First few years they went slow, but then suddenly when the markets grew, their business model started to grow, became enterprise level, which everyone wanted, and they could service many clients using technology. They could scale all of a sudden without having to invest too much. So, obviously, a lot of stuff aligned for them. Their markets were quite regulated or different. They were not, their client base was not getting competitor services or good offerings from next best alternatives that they had. So clearly, these guys grew very well, and many other examples is like that. So bootstrapping automatically the diligence comes in, your resource optimization comes in, and it's a great model if you can make it work. For some businesses, unfortunately, you can't make it work. You can't be in a business of Amazon and Flipkart and be bootstrapped. I think it will be very hard. You will need to raise capital, will need to move fast because otherwise your other competitors are gonna eat you up. So if your business can allow that, your business model, your business plan allows it, it's a great thing, I think.
Awesome, Kunal. It's good to hear that you mentioned about Zoho and Zerodha. I think there are some other heroes from the startup ecosystem who scaled up to greater heights without raising even a single rupee from in external capital from professional investors or any sort of external investors. What are some of the key lessons that we can learn from the bootstrap heroes, for that matter, when it comes to scaling up?
I think the lessons are number one, scale up takes time. You need to build a core base foundation, like I talked about the tree. It has to grow straight up for a long time before it starts branching out. That's one of the lessons, that your scale up will be a little slower, but much more sustainable and hopefully with a strong base and strong platform. One. Second, I think most of them are highly digital these days. So Zerodha is completely technology driven. They brought in a model of no branch, no sub broker model. So they are a discount broker. They said no client wants any advice. Any client who wants to just trade should come to our platform, find the market data, and put in an order. And their technology was very seamless. Customer onboarding was very simple, very intuitive, etc. So being digital and being scalable from technology perspective helps them. That's what many bootstrap businesses do. Zoho did similar things. Thirdly, I think focus a lot on your customer. Being customer centric, focusing on your target client is very important. If you're not focusing on them, Amazon is the most passionate company when it comes to being customer centric. So they care for their customers so much. And if you do that, you can build a culture in your company where everyone in the company cares for the customer. I think you're likely to build a good platform and you're likely to be successful. So these are two, three main lessons you can think about. So right speed of scaling up comes automatically in Bootstrap, I believe. Secondly, being customer centric. Thirdly, being more digital driven, and core platform being strong to be able to scale up. These are three, four key lessons I think I can derive from Zoho's and Zero and the many other bootstrapped companies who've scaled well in the world.
Thank you, Kunal. I think Dimple had similar questions around this topic, and I think her first question is automatically answered. And we should actually be thankful to Dimple Verma, who is our cohort member at ICANN Virtual Accelerator that we started. It was her idea to come up with this session, on scaling up, and she was very kind to contribute some of the questions that I'm asking you today. Some of the ideas actually came from her. So, Dimple, thank you very much, first of all. And secondly, to your second question, which is very interesting, it says, by scaling, what do you mean in terms of percentage growth? How much percentage growth should be there to mention it as scaling up? Now, could you really tag that percentage for us, Kunal?
Uh, Varies from business to business, sector to sector, country to country. If you're growing, if your GDP, so let's look at India. Barring this year, Indian GDP was growing anywhere around 5% year on year, last year or year before. So if you're growing more than 5% means you are doing better than overall economy, right? Just put a number. If you're growing a big company like Reliance, you're growing 10% or 20%, you're doing very well. Very, very well. Because your base is huge. Your TCS, you're growing at 10-20%, it's a massive number. But for a startup who's got only a few people, few dozens of people at most, few uh, hundreds of clients at most, for them, I think the scale has to be thought about as 50%, 100%, 200%. This is scaling up for at the startup stages mean, which may last for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years only. It will not last for 20 years. The power of compounding will be impossible. You in 20 years, if you're growing 300% year on year, you will be Amazon, right? And many people will never get there, right? So I think what we're looking at is at least 50% up to 200%. That's a real scale we think about in startups. Could be more, of course. Many companies grow tenfold in some years as well, like Zoom might have in the last few months. So that's what the level of scale and the quantification would be. It would not be 10-20%. It should be 40-50% at least going into 200-300% or so for a few years. This is what you can expect from startups.
Amazing, amazing. Now, when it comes to expanding geographically, and thinking to scale up into new geographies, how should one plan for it? when it comes to scaling up nationally and say even internationally?
So, um, depends on your business again. It's not as simple and as easy as it sounds. You know, you may have done very well with your product in Bangalore, but it may do nothing for Delhi. Culturally, Bangalore and Delhi are very different. Okay, and your product may have done very well in India, but it may do nothing in Japan or nothing in China, or it may not be as people may not accept it in UK or US. So expansion, when you are doing whether within some cities or states or you are doing internationally, understand a few things. One, must study the markets very deeply. If you don't understand the markets, if you don't understand the market landscape, you'll struggle. Don't do that. Go very deep and understand whether your product market fit really exists where you're trying to go. Spend enough time and resources for that. Secondly, do understand that you will need good leadership in order to deliver good results into each market, because obviously all markets are competitive. It's not that if Paytm has done well in India, they will do very well in US too. US will have its own set of challenges, its own customer behavior, its own regulations. US will have its own competitor, other companies who are doing similar things. So you must, if you don't have, if you're doing well in India and you want to open up UK, for example, or China, for example, you will need leadership. So you will need somebody to go in there and act like a co-founder of a new startup, which seems to be funded from a startup, but it's again a startup which has some base, some funds, but that's it. Beyond that, in execution, if you don't have top level leadership who can execute in those markets, who has either proven experience or a lot of hunger to execute, you will fail. Just don't hire an employee to run that business for you. You need senior leadership. One of the founders should go out and do it, or you must bring in some real senior talent to run it in those countries, and must study those markets very well. Don't just assume that your product worked here will work everywhere else too.
Excellent, Kunal. Um, Now, when it comes to early stage businesses, Excel sheets matter a lot. You know how you put your numbers in place, you build your projection plans and all. And entrepreneurs are often put under the spotlight for the same, for making their projection plans. And when the investors go on to vet them, there are some awkward moments as well when there are questions around it. Now, it's all related to your plans of scale, right? When you have to plan your scalability, you build out those plans, etc. How can entrepreneurs maintain a balance between optimism and pragmatism?
So, um, so business plans are built on optimism. You need to be able to show, project growth based on some assumptions. But same time, don't be unrealistic and say that Amazon is doing this, so I should be considered the same way, or somebody else did. So you need some benchmarks. It always helps that if there are other companies who've had similar journeys, that you can say they could achieve their scale by doing these things. I could do the same, or I could do better or worse because of these market conditions or these capabilities and all. That helps. But uh, it's hard to manage optimism with pragmatism early days. Early days, it's optimism which takes over. But when you run your business plan for 1 to 3 years and you realize what numbers you are projecting and what you're really getting are uh, are far different, then you realize that then you start becoming more pragmatic. Some things just pragmatism just comes with time. The only other way to balance this out is bring in some external mentors, guides, board members, board advisors who can put some more reality check into your projections, because they hopefully know that these markets and businesses don't grow as fast. Your business plan may not grow as fast as you're expecting in Excel. It's easy to put money in Excel, very hard to actually execute and put that money into your bank account. That's the hardest thing.
Great, thank you so much. Coming back to the employees part, when it comes to, of course, scaling up, how can an entrepreneur encourage his employees and ensure that they are on the same page and running with the same motivation to help scale the business?
Communicate with them, keep them apprised of the vision on a periodic basis, weekly, monthly, quarterly. tell them what you're doing, what you're trying to do, be open to feedback, ask them questions if you're struggling. Sometimes you can outsource the answers to your problems and keep them motivated, keep talking to them, stay in touch with them. It's easier said than done because obviously there are lots of distractions in your life, lots of challenges which would come up. But constantly being able to find time in a disciplined manner with your team members, communicate and to share everything as transparently as you can, that's the best thing you can and you must do. That ways they are also more empowered, engaged, and they will hopefully share a lot more with you, which can help you. And they will hopefully work closely with you than not. So just communicating well with most of them, all of always helps.
Excellent. Kunal, you're an angel investor, and this very relevant question, which many people want to hear the answer of, is what role do the investors play in scaling our process?
So angel investors typically do not play much of a role. They are typically angel investors are early stage investors after some traction and some business product viability, etc. Angel investors will come in and put in some money, but they're not generally, for the most part, ever involved in the business. They're available for you if you need advice, you need introductions from them, you need connect from them, you need inputs from them. They would be available, but they're not really day to day involved much. Venture capital firms, when you get to Series A funding or Series B funding, venture capital firms get more involved because A, they put in more money. The money they put in is runs in crores to dozens of crores. So they will be more involved in your business day to day. They'll pretty much let you do what you're doing to an extent, as long as what projections you give them are acceptable to them, and as long as you're meeting those projections, which rarely happens, by the way. The problems start when you don't meet your projections and you miss them not by 5-10%, but you miss them by 80% or 50%. That's when the fights start. That's when the quarrel starts, and that's when it becomes difficult. Why do you think Flipkart co-founder left when they sold to Walmart? One of them left, right? Clearly some investor issue. Investor wants them to do something, they don't want to do that. So investors eventually will get involved in running your business if they have to, because they've put in a lot of money. But they will hopefully open up some doors for you as well. They will do some connects. They will show you a lot of opportunities as well, that you could do this as well, that as well, etc. All those things can help. So venture capital investors can possibly help, but equally they can also possibly hurt too, because they will not be aligned with your vision as much as, and they will not know your business or product as well as you do. They will not be as passionate about it as you might be. They will be just thinking numbers. For them, what they look for is two things. One, you are making a lot of revenues and a lot of profits if possible. If not, then you're growing enough where they can sell their stake to another investor, right? So as long as those things happen, they are okay. They will not care whether you started off as one business and ended up as another. They will not care. You might. So when see investors get involved, they do drive scale, push you to scale in, against your wish, make you do things which you may not want at times, and at times be very helpful as well, and be very supportive of helping you achieve scale as well by their network and their other portfolio companies, connects, etc. So they can be helpful. VCs are typically, they try to be. Sometimes they don't end up being helpful. They rather end up hurting you and your business more. But typically speaking, angel investors are more passive. They would be less involved with you in day to day, but they can support you at times when you need them, if you need them, because your and their interest is aligned to grow the value of your company, because they have the same shares that you do. You just have 80% more than them or 50% more than them, but they have the same shares. They're also willing to help, but they're not typically involved in scaling up or anything. They would be happy sitting back and getting a monthly or quarterly report saying that, yes, you've grown from 100 to 150 or 200 or 300 every year or something. So that's about the investors' help in scaling up.
Excellent. So, Dimple wants to pick your brains on on the franchise models. So, what do you suggest
Hmm.
between company owned, company operated versus franchise owned, company operated models in case of a franchise business? Which one do you think is better when it comes to scalability?
So if you have money, make it company owned. Like Chayos, for example, raised a lot of money. All their stores are company operated and company owned. But if you don't have as much money, but you have a great platform which can scale great product, say you are McDonald's or say you are Lapino's Pizza from Chandigarh, for example, then franchise model works too. Because in that model, you don't have to spend much in the scale. Your franchise partners do it for you. As long as you are able to almost guarantee or generate some good return for them, they will stick with it. They'll help you achieve the scale you want. So it really depends. If you have enough money, do it yourself, and you're willing to execute it that way, do it yourself. But if you don't have enough money, which is true for most startups, but your products and ideas are great, your products are scalable, like Lapino's Pizza of Chandigarh, bootstrapped, doing fantastically well, hundreds of franchisees, then in that case, just go the franchise model.
Excellent. Now, the last one from my side, and I request everyone if they have any further questions, please post in the comment box. We are waiting for your questions. Kunal, the last one on my list is taking cue from the likes of Snapdeal. Assuming that a startup fails in the process of scaling up, they screw up badly, and there is some mismanagement on their end, what does the road ahead look like? How is it like to proceed from there, and what all can they do to get back on track?
So hard to answer, hard to generalize. It's almost like asking a question that you're driving a car on a highway, you drove too fast, you bumped into a truck in front of you, you crashed into a truck. Now your car is either completely gone, then it will just go for scraps, you go bankrupt, or your car has hit, but it can recover. You can get the denting and painting done and go back and may not drive as fast again, but you will get back. That's pretty much what the Snapdeal story probably is, and many other startup story is, who go too fast, but then break something, and then they have to reevaluate. Sometimes you break a little bit, you have time and ability to adapt and come back and make changes and still survive and get back on the road and do pretty okay. Many times you don't. So Snapdeal, for example, was doing lots of stuff very fast, raised $1.5 billion dollars or so in 2016. Was it 6 billion, 7 billion valuation from SoftBank? But since then have done nothing, right? Or they had to shrink down because they were not going to get the next round of funding. They stopped giving discounts. Their market stopped growing. Now they are on track to be a bootstrapped-ish um, real business where you will have to make some profit on every transaction or you can't survive. That's what they're trying to do. Now, there'll be two very small a player in the market if they operate like that, because the other Flipkarts and Amazons are massive, and they will be able to burn billions of dollars every year still for a number of years to come. So Snapdeal will not be in the same league anymore. It's like almost like going from one city to national to international, then going back to the same city or a handful of cities only. That's how they have scaled down. But yes, they are able to survive. I'm sure they are doing okay. I'm sure they're doing well. I don't use Snapdeal much anymore, but you know, so in those cases, it's sometimes possible to still survive. Many times it's not possible to survive, or the entrepreneurs say, "I don't want to play that game anymore. It's too small for me. I wanted to play the big league, and I'm out of it now. And so I'm not gonna play anymore." So many startups hence shut down when they break down. So it comes down to the entrepreneurs and their ambitions and their interests and all that.
Excellent. Now, a question from Raghu, and this is what you've answered many times in the previous sessions, but allow me to ask you again. It says, what is the best way to approach seed investors? He's been submitting plans online and sending emails to investors. Is there a better way to do that? Any suggestions on the same?
Yeah. So I think if you watch, Vineet can put it in the window, in the chat window, the previous links to all the master classes we've had. There is one on raising funds from investors, I believe, and there we talk about how to approach the investors. Basically, go with a qualified introduction. Right now, allow me to let me try and put it in a way which you may be able to understand or relate with. So, Raghu, if you're trying to approach any girl in your class or college or anything, and if you just go to everyone and give a rose and say, I want to talk to you or go out with me for a coffee, it's not likely to work, because the moment you do that, defense mechanism goes up, and there is no reason for her to be interested in you, unless, of course, you look like Ritik or something. Okay. But if, on the other hand, you make friends with a friend of that girl you want to approach, and you become friends with him or her, and have him or her tell the person you want to reach out to that, hey, this is a nice guy, let's hang out with him, she might be okay. She might be, her defense mechanism would be down. She would be okay connecting, and then that would be your opportunity to connect and hopefully pitch and take it forward from there. Investors, unfortunately, are in similar, fortunately or unfortunately, are in similar category. There are a lot of startups. There are a handful of investors. So for you to just send them an email, just think for a minute from their perspective, how many emails do they get? If you are sending one, tens, hundreds of people sending two. If you're sending them one LinkedIn message, there are tens and hundreds of sending them two. Right? Because that's easy. But these are not effective ways to convert. The way to connect with an investor, the best suggested way is to go with a qualified introduction. You must be able to find from their LinkedIn, from their Twitter, from their Facebook, how are you connected to them, who else do they, whom you know to, and then ask that person to do an introduction. You will know some uncle, aunt, brother, sister, cousin, this is India, neighbor. You will know someone who will know someone who will know that investor. Go with a qualified introduction. Have them introduce you, then at least your mail would be read, your message would be heard. They may say yes or no depending on the merit of your proposal, merit of your startup. That's okay, but at least you will get heard. That's one. Go with a qualified introduction. Second way to meet them is go into conferences, go into events where they are speaking, talk to them, and just see how it goes. If you can't go to conferences anymore, go to these kind of events. Lots of webinars happening these days. Way too many, maybe. Connect with them and say, I heard you, I have a question, I want to connect. May I connect? Many investors are open with that. If you give them a reason to connect, and if you tell them that, look, I was connected with you on the webinar, or we were in the same group, or I heard you on the panel and now I want to reach out, they're more likely to connect that way and more likely to respond that way. So qualified introduction is the way to approach. Very briefly, and there are a lot many more things we talked about in one of the previous sessions. I forget which one was it, but I've covered this many times before. Similar conversations would be there as well. Maybe some more depth might be available there.
Perfect. Mukesh has a question. He's asking, why do investors in India look at the revenue model when we are trying to build something valuable to get more traction and deeper into the market without charging them? So I think what he means is that when you don't have a business model, when you're just trying to maybe build a freemium model to start with, then why do the investors want to look at the revenue model all the times?
Who asked this question?
Mukesh. Mukesh did.
So, Mukesh, I'm assuming you're not Mukesh Ambani. If you were, I would like to get some time with you. But Mukesh, here's the point. Imagine I'm your fund manager or I'm your banker, and I tell you, give me 5 lakh rupees and I'll give you return. Will you not want to know where I'm putting the money? Will you not ask me how fast it may grow? What is the reason of my investment thesis? It's the same reason. You are telling an investor to trust you, and assuming, obviously, if the investor is your family, it's your father, it's your relative, they may trust you and give you the money and forget it, and that's okay. That's a friends family round of funding. It can happen. You can do whatever with it, and if it works, great. If not, then they had written it off the moment they had given it to you. But for investors, this is okay if you tell them that for 3 years I'm gonna make money, or for 1 year I'm not gonna make money, but after that I believe I will have these many users, I will be able to charge this much, and because of the quality of my product, they will be willing to pay me this much, and this will equate to this kind of a business model. You must have a business model to talk about, even if it doesn't work, even if it changes later, even if it adapts a lot. All the business plans change dramatically. Okay, that's okay. But you not having a revenue business model is, then how will you give them money back? You are not like Facebook or Google, where you have millions of users and you can say, we'll think about monetizing it later. Not WhatsApp yet. You're not WhatsApp But you're not Geo either, where Geo said for a year we're not gonna charge anything and then we'll figure it out. Geo could do that, right? Ambani had the government backing; they were getting the 2 lakh crores from in debt funding, etc. Startups can't do that. So for equity funding, you need to have a plan. It may change, it may evolve. That's okay. But by the way, also most qualified investors, even angel investors for that matter, do not typically invest in ideas only or no revenue business models unless you have a good number of user base. You have a user base, you're not monetizing it, you have million users, that's okay. But if you have a 10 users and you say, I have only 10 users on an app, for example, I'm not charging them, they're not paying me. I don't know what business model is going to look like. Angel investors will not invest into that. They do want to see product platform, user base, revenue. If you don't have revenue, but you have big user base, it's okay. That can work. Okay. But have a plan. It may.
Thank you, Kunal. Now that we only have 3-4 minutes to go, I already have two questions that I can ask you right away. So Anand is asking, and Anand, I'm taking the liberty to ask it in a different way. From what I understood, he says that any points for those startups who are indirectly competing with unicorns. Um, how can they start? How should they start and further proceed?
So, guys, you know, I hear this a lot. So, two things I want to quickly tell you. You may know this at the risk of repeating, I would still say. Number one, your ideas need not be unique. It's if Flipkart is the same thing, you are doing the same, it's okay. Copying someone is not a bad idea. Flipkart was not a new idea. Amazon existed before it. Google was not the first search engine. Alta Vista existed before. So number one, copying someone is okay. Okay. Now, number two, big companies are typically corporatized. They are more process driven. Big companies are slow to move. They are very slow to maneuver. So big companies take a long time to make changes. That is your advantage. If you're a startup, you can move much faster into new domains. So, as an example, Google was very slow in adapting to a social network, building Google Plus. Microsoft was very slow in scaling up Bing. Google did it faster than them. So Microsoft lost to Google in search engine. Google lost to Facebook in social network. Facebook lost to, I don't know, whom did Facebook lose to? Uh, they just lost the US elections, I think, but they lost to TikTok, for example, or they lost Instagram, etc., which they ended up buying. Okay, being small is your advantage. I would not worry if you're competing with Google or Flipkart or someone, as long as you have an execution plan which gives you the advantage of moving fast in some newer segment or some newer way of things evolving, which the big companies will take a long time to adapt to because they will have to have corporate meetings, they will have to talk to US, Washington, or wherever their Walmart offices are before making a decision. But you can make a decision in a minute and have the whole company move. So, frankly, competing with big companies is not a problem. Okay, the way you execute your plan, how you're going to distinguish from them, how you're going to do better than them, how you the markets are changing, client needs are changing, product set is changing, or regulation is changing. In some change, how you going to execute that change management better? That's your advantage. And should not worry about unicorns. They have lots of money, but frankly, beyond a point, generally they don't have good execution anymore, and they don't have the ability that you can bring to the table. So depending on whatever you're trying to do, it's okay as long as you can execute better than them. You are in play.
Excellent, Kunal. And the last one I want to take from someone that I really appreciate. Now, this gentleman is obviously a very senior person. He's a very senior guy. He's been very regular to our events, I'd say, from last 3 years or so. He's been to Canable 2017. He's been to Canable 2.0, 3.0. He's been very regular to our webinars and whatever we've been doing, including starter master classes. It's Mr. Paramjeet Singh Sidhu. Hi, sir. Thank you so much for asking this question. Though, whatever little I could understand, from what you wrote, uh, he's asking about some of the case studies, and maybe you can guide us where to find those case studies with some facts and figures for small startups, which will have do's and don'ts that they can refer to. Is there any manual, any book that they can refer to, when it comes to do's and don'ts?
Um, so, frankly, what I've shared is from my previous 10 years of experience in the startup ecosystem where I raised money, ran a couple of businesses, and now I'm investing on the side and still running some tech businesses. I don't know of any book or any source. There are, if you should Google this up, I have no idea what is a good source. There's no, there's no gold standard in this space yet. Uh, as a side note, I'm attempting to write a book on social startups, where one angle would be on social, why startups need to be focused on more society and sustainable development goals. And then a second part would be what to do and what not to do. Some do's and don'ts, some tricks, some stuff. So I'm trying to put out something which should come out in the next 2 to 3 months, I guess. I'll happily share the link here in the chat box here. You can subscribe for the book, and whenever it's released, you will get a copy of it. I'm trying to write something. There would be some points like we talked about one of the topics here, scaling up. There'd be many more topics covered there. I'll attempt to have lots of do's and don'ts with a lot of hacks and inner inside secrets that can help you get a lot of stuff done within a startup in a jugaad way. But there's not many sources I know of. Somebody in the chat put in some of the sources, so best to Google up and follow some of the startup investors or critics or startup gurus that are out there. There are some people who are really good. So you can connect with them on Twitter, LinkedIn, or something and follow what they keep saying. Some have really good gyan. So that's what I would suggest. I don't know of any sources or any books myself. I've never read one either. Just learned from my own mistakes, actually. So, if Vineet, that's it. I think we are out of time, guys.
Absolutely.
So, thanks very much, Vineet. Guys, so I'm gonna put out a couple of links if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow my startup blog. I write a little from time to time. This is an upcoming book. I'll put a link to that as well. Feel free to subscribe to it. And otherwise, Vineet, I'll let you finish while I put out the links. And anything last words you want to say, please?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kunal, for sparing your time, and thanks to everyone who made it and heard this conversation. We hope, and we are already getting the comments that you found it useful. So thank you so much, guys. This really keeps us motivated to do more. Now, the way Dimple did it, she suggested and came up with a topic as a suggestion that we should be, doing a session on scale up journey for startups. And I think if at all you guys have any suggestions that you would want us to cover in the upcoming startup master classes, we would be very happy to take some of them. So feel free to reach out to our email IDs, the channels through which we reach out to you, invite you to our startup master classes. Just send us, your suggestions. And for the next, startup master class, when you fill out the form, just just fill along the topic that you're most interested in. We'll try and include that, say, in the next one or the next to next one, or whenever there is an opportunity. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us again, and thanks, Kunal, again for sparing your time. We'll see you next time for the next startup masterclass. Please stay tuned in through our social media handles and reach out to any of us if at all you feel like. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Bye.